Okay, so today, we're going to discuss how we can make the payment side of charging more simple, how we can streamline it. We're going to discuss the hindrances, the solutions, the possibilities of making this as easy as possible. Now, of course, we just heard from Stephen there. Lots and lots of players, lots and lots of opportunity. And for the consumer, what that will probably mean is lots and lots of confusion. We've all heard stories, of course, about multiple apps, multiple payment systems and solutions, loading credit, reaping rewards, downloading lots and lots of things, all of those stuff that we've got to get through to help drivers make a switch easier. So what we're going to talk about now is how far away are we from being able to pay for a charge as easily as we buy a coffee? For those of you who are viewing online, I'm not sure where I'm going to look or point, then please remember you can use the chat box on the live stream to post questions to the panel, and we'll come to those at the end. So please make sure that you submit your questions throughout. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have three here. I'm going to start on my left with Alyssia Williams, who's the Electrification Payments Integration Lead for BP Pulse. We then have Richard Campion, who's Head of Acceptance at Visa. And joining us via Zoom is Anthony Eskinazi, Founder and CEO of JustPark. So welcome to you, and thank you very much for joining us all today. So I'm going to start with a kind of general, easy, kind of simple question, hopefully. And really, just to kick off, and I'll come to you first, Alyssia, if I can. If we're going to achieve our sustainability goals, we know that we need to accelerate the shift away from petrol and diesel cars, from combustion engine cars. Now, the availability of electric car charge points is one of the key things to help us do that. What is your organisation doing to ease the challenges of charging an EV?
Cool. So as BP Pulse, we're actually on a mission to electrify the world by focusing on fast, on-the-go charging. And our aim is actually to have over 100,000 charge points globally by 2030. So we're growing rapidly. And in the UK in particular, we're investing £1 billion in infrastructure over the next 10 years. So we're not only growing and increasing the number of charge points, but we're also focusing on upgrading the reliability of our network, as well as investing in giving customers the experience and the service that they expect. And our data actually indicates that we have strong and improving network reliability and customer satisfaction. And yeah, we're committed to continue to deliver these improvements through the investment in our infrastructure and our people.
Thank you. So some key points you've just raised in your answer there. I'm going to come to you now, Richard, because you talked about reliability and you talked about scale and you talked about convenience. What does that mean for Visa? What's your role in all of this?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important. Within Visa, our main aim is to make sure that paying for an EV charge isn't a barrier to EV adoption, so that we can make that charging experience as simple as buying that cup of coffee. And what that's going to mean in the real world is that we need payment experiences that are simple, that are reliable, that are secure, exactly as you were saying. But I think we need to go a step further than that as well and make sure that these solutions work for both consumers and fleet operators. And so I think the provision of data is going to be incredibly important to make sure that we can serve those needs.
Anthony, hello there. Question for you. Obviously, your model is different to your colleagues on the panel. Tell us about what JustPark is doing.
Sure. So EV infrastructure at the moment has kind of kept up with demand, but I think that's partly down to the fact that, the supply chain shortage has meant that, if you want an EV at the moment, you're waiting 12 to 18 months. But, if a pandemic hadn't happened, would that still be the case? And so what we're doing at JustPark is saying we've got, the charging point operators, the government are doing a good job at installing destination charging and building up that public infrastructure. But there are hundreds of thousands of charging points sitting on private property. So that could be someone's driveway, it could be a place of work. And they're only being used a fraction of the time. So, in the same way the sharing economy sort of boomed in the last, 10 to 15 years, how do we harness the power, literally, of all of those private chargers? Can we aggregate them? Can we make them public through marketplace products, like JustPark and others. What that allows you to do is, firstly, it's a decentralized network, which means less strain on the grid. These spaces can then be reservable as well. But also, most importantly, when you start looking at these private chargers and this infrastructure, it serves a very specific use case. And I think I heard the lady at the beginning from Oxford talk about how do we serve people who live in terrace houses, people who won't have access to home charging solutions. Well, if you can use your neighbor's charger, if I look at my own personal charger, I've probably got the only publicly available charger within about 500-600 meters of where I live. So the block of flats down the road, etc. The charger on my driveway is their closest public charger and the most convenient and cheapest way to charge overnight. And so many people are going to be left behind because they don't have driveway. And obviously accessing mobility hubs, super hubs, etc. is fantastic, but it is normally still a more expensive and slightly less convenient way to charge than charging at home.
Thank you. So we've covered off some of the general themes, I suppose, as an introduction there. The reality of it is probably by the end of next year, maybe the early part of 2024, we'll have 1 million electric cars on UK roads. So we're not even at 1 million yet. If you didn't know, there are about 30 to 33 million cars on the roads in the UK at the moment. So EVs are only just at the very, very start of that. However, by the end of the decade, we think at Auto Trader there'll be 9 million electric cars on the road. So going from where we are to there is very, very quick. It's a rapid progression. Now, a lot of those people are not going to have access potentially to their own charging solution. They're going to need public chargers. So that's where this starts to really come into play. And the key thing for them, of course, is convenience. So I'm going to come to you first, Richard. Convenience is the driver for so many decisions that people make and will probably take on more importance in future decades with younger generations. So what do you see are the current sticking points at the payment part of the charging process, and what have we learned and noticed? What can we take from consumer behaviour?
Yeah, certainly. Let me take a step back first of all, and the way that consumers have been making payments continues to evolve. And with the adoption of contactless, so across Europe now, about 88% of transactions are in face-to-face are now contactless. If you wind the clock back 10 years or so ago, it was hardly anything. And really it was the mobility networks, it was the likes of TfL that started to accelerate that change. And I think some of the best payment experiences are those that are entirely forgetful. Think of Uber, for instance. So the way that we envisage EV charging and payment for EV charging to evolve, I think it will be contactless payment as a minimum. Then you will have in-app payments, which will support some of the loyalty solutions. And then I think that's going to progress even further along to plug and charge, where the vehicle can communicate directly with the charge point. So I think it's really going to be an evolution. But it's so fragmented at the moment that when you turn up at that charge point, you really don't know what the payment experience is going to be until you arrive there. And I think that's the kind of comfort, or we need to address that situation so that people have comfort that when they turn up, they can charge, it can be simple.
What are the drivers for there being, there's two questions really. The drivers for there being lots of different means of paying, I guess is question number one, why is that? And number two, are we seeing any moves to take that away, to remove that barrier? Because you're right, for the consumer, you turn up to somewhere, and at the moment, it's not the case in many other things, activities that we'll do. You kind of know what's going to happen when you get to a place and roughly what you're going to have to pay for something. Why are those things in the way at the moment, and do you see them starting to break down?
No, I think it's an emerging segment, and I think it started to evolve from nothing sort of 5 years ago, and it just evolves at different spaces and in different ways. What I think we're starting to see now is now the regulatory piece has started to take effect. So the likes of the AFA regulation in Europe, the OZEV pieces within the UK, I think that's going to start to bring together the ecosystem to work towards a common standard.
Thank you. Alyssia, a question for you from BP Pulse perspective. Do you find with the people that use your stations, your charge points, Are you seeing that they value convenience, and do you think that's a differentiator for a charge point network? Could it and should it be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to be able to provide fast, reliable charging that fits within the busy lives of our customers, right? And what we're seeing today is that the environment is quite complex. Often customers, or some customers, are left feeling overwhelmed with multiple apps that they have to register or sign up to, and they also feel worried about are they going to have enough or a good network signal whenever they arrive at the EV charger. Some customers are also worried whether they're going to get the customer service they need, because a lot of the EV chargers are unattended. But ultimately, the customer wants to be able to find a charger, charge their car, pay the way they want to, and go. And so as part of that, we believe in giving customers the flexibility and simplicity in the ways that they pay, so that they can focus on the journey ahead and not so much about what are they going to do when they get to the EV charger.
With that flexibility, what kind of thing what do you mean? What kind of...
Different methods of payment options available to them. Like Richard said, you can have a digital experience, either through dynamic QR codes, a web interface, or a mobile application. You could have a guest checkout as part of that experience, or a vault and wallet feature for registered customers. Alternatively, you can have a contactless card-present payment solution that's available for customers. And another area of payment method that could be available to the customer is subscriptions, which is based generally on like a monthly billing process. There are other payment methods out there, but those are the most common. And those are the kind of choices that we want to be able to give our customers, because not everyone wants to pay in the same way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anthony, a question for you, if I can, on your model. That's an interesting one. 4 in 5 EV drivers charge at home, we're told. So in theory, there is that's where the volume at the moment is for people who want to charge their electric car. How are you finding consumers, how easy is it for consumers? Because it really, in theory, it ought to be one of the easiest ways of charging an electric car, actually. If you know that somebody around the corner or down the road or your neighbour's got a space that you can use and a charger that you can use, what observations do you have on how people are using your app to charge their cars?
So what we've found is, again, like you said, 4 in 5 EV drivers can charge at home. So the sort of demand for that overnight charging product isn't really there yet. But we know that to accelerate that or facilitate that mass adoption of electric vehicles, you kind of need that network there before the demand comes. So we're finding actually a lot of people are using our sort of driveway and private work network more for destination charging than overnight charging at the moment. So if if your home is near a point of interest, a high street, so that's the main use case. But we're also looking at the EV sector sort of through a parking lens, and everything the rest of the panel just described in terms of the sort of proliferation of apps. The fact you have to create a dedicated folder for not just your parking apps now, but your EV charging apps. We've been here before. I imagine many people in the room have 2, 3, 4 parking apps on their phone, and it's a shame that either the government didn't intervene or the private sector didn't see this coming, because all it's doing is causing sort of choice paralysis and people getting frustrated. The number of complaints we get just saying, I don't want to have to download another app every time. I think the stats from what I remember are 97% of drivers have a smartphone, but I imagine that number for EV drivers is probably well over 99.5%. And so, yes, having mobile phone signal is essential, but I don't think we would have needed to necessarily adopt loads of new payment methods and sort of regulate that every public charger needs a contactless solution if we'd got the app piece right and sort of forced aggregation or the OCPP compliance a little bit earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, and that's where the data point comes in that you made earlier on, Richard, is open data, so that users can find the right place for the right need at the right time. I'm going to come to you, Alyssia, now for another question, which is obviously the number of chargers in globally is growing enormously, doubled in the last 3 years. What advancements have we seen in payment systems, and what do you think can be done moving forward?
Okay, so advancements, I mean, just picking up some of the methods that we have discussed, there are three generally payment solutions available to customers today, whether it be fleet customers or on-the-go customers. And those are the three that we've mentioned already, which is the digital experience, the contactless card-present experience, and then subscriptions through monthly billing. In terms of the solutions that we've seen in the digital and card-present space, a lot of the advancements tend towards ensuring a wide range of payment types are accepted, as well as the adaptability to new payment methods. We've also seen in unattended payment terminal technologies a shift towards Android-based operating software, which allows us to then implement full-on customer journeys on the device. In the subscription space, we've seen quite a bit of maturity in the use of machine learning in terms of calculating when is the best time to do that monthly run to manage the risk associated with failed payment runs and also reduce that frequency of it happening. But moving forward, the second part of the question, there is still quite a lot that can be done. And at the end of the day, we're looking for innovative solutions that help us as e-mobility service providers to offer frictionless customer journeys. And a huge part of that is collaborating with each other as payment providers, charging supply infrastructure providers and operators, and electric vehicle manufacturers. Currently, a great example of that level of collaboration is the plug and charge experience, which is enabled through ISO 15118. It is a simple and secure way for customers to charge because they drive up to the charger, they plug in the cable, they charge their car, they unplug, hopefully they unplug, and then they drive away. So it is really simple, and for electric mobility service providers, it also helps us streamline our operational processes. And that is the direction that I think would add quite a lot of meaning to a customer's journey, because it adds that level of innovation, but also helps us to work together across the various suppliers to provide a solution that is easy for customers to use.
You touched on a few things, and we're just coming on to kind of the second phase of charging, really. I guess the basic, it sounds like, would be that there's a simple experience. I can pay in the way that I want, and I can then move on and complete my journey or whatever I want to do. But that starts to evolve, doesn't it, when we talk about incentives and reward and loyalty and a different type of relationship, and actually something where the consumer starts to benefit from being able to charge. I'm going to come to Anthony first and then to you, Richard, just for your thoughts, really, on what kind of, or how rewards and incentives might begin to emerge from different parts of the consumer journey, and what opportunities might they bring?
So again, sort of thinking back, looking at my experience in the parking sector, parking when you arrive at a destination, so this could be an event, a venue, or supermarket, the car park is both the entrance and the exit to that experience. So you have actually a lot of power to control, firstly, how positive an experience you have, the consumer has actually doing what they're there to do, but also you can actually influence their behavior through incentives, loyalty programs, etc. So you charge at Sainsbury's, for example, and you get a coupon or something else that pops up on your app or via a text message. So actually, I think similar to what we've seen in the parking sector, which is probably best part of 3-4 years ahead of where the EV charging sector is in thinking about this, the opportunities are kind of endless. And it's all down to the sort of creativity of the different providers. But I think you look at what apps such as, the Octopus Electric Juice Network, ZapPay, Power, Monta, a few of these sort of software providers that are, gaining some real traction and a lot of investment as well. By aggregating all the networks, they are very much trying to become that go-to app, the one app you have on your phone. And if they have a compelling business model, they get great coverage, they charge the appropriate amount, then you build that user base, and the opportunities to actually monetize that user base offer the sort of added value benefits will be pretty exciting.
Yeah, it feels like that is an emerging, excuse me, an emerging opportunity. Richard, what's your views? Because there's probably quite a lot of scope here.
Yeah, I think there's huge opportunity here. A couple of the things that we're working on at the moment within, and I go back to the data piece, within Visa's processing network, we can identify who is an EV owner just by whether or not they've used their Visa card to make a public charge. Beyond that, you can then start to look at what's the rest of their spend behaviour, completely anonymised, but you can see, where is this individual spending, where are they travelling to, etc. What's their type of sort of demographic level, and then you can start to use that information to tailor specific offers for that individual. I think the risk that we face is, there's only so much loyalty that a person and a fleet can absorb at any one point. So I'm assuming that we're going to get to the point where you will have perhaps 1, 2, 3 sort of loyalty apps within your phone, but then you will still need just the basic, charge payment infrastructure for your other charging needs. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that space does develop, but loyalty is definitely going to play a role here.
Add on that as well. I think one of the important things is that, especially with convenience, is that the customer wants to make the best out of their charging break, right? And leveraging off of our infrastructure, we're also able to offer customers the ability to shop for their goods, get a cup of coffee at the cafe, wash their car as well. And that's all part of that driving the incentives and behaviors associated with EV charging, because you're able to offer the customer the convenience of doing other things whilst they are charging their car. As an example, we have about over 250 charge points currently at over 60 BP sites that have an M&S store. And we recently also just announced that as an extension of our partnership with M&S, that we're going to be implementing high-speed chargers in their parking lots at over, I think, 70 M&S stores. So very, very close relationship in terms of the cross-acceptance for driving convenience.
Yeah, and I guess that will be something that can then feed the loyalty and incentives that we just talked about. I'm going to come on to the last couple of questions. Excuse me. And we've had a question from the audience, actually, and it's something related to kind of, well, really to sum things up. Do we think, I'm going to start with Anthony again, do we think charging is really going to get to the point where it will be as easy as buying a coffee?
Yes. I'm not sure how quickly, though. I look at plug and go, or plug and charge, I think it's called, is the future. Tesla already adopted it, and it is absolutely seamless, by far the easiest way to charge any vehicle on the road. But there's a lot of legacy infrastructure in place, and a lot of I don't know, in terms of the cars supporting it as well. So I think we're easily 5+ years away from this being sort of adopted en masse. But there's no reason why it shouldn't. Already in the parking sector, through automatic number plate recognition cameras, you drive in and out of a car park. You don't take an app out your phone. You don't take a credit card out your wallet. It just charges you for the time you've parked. So that is the equivalent of plug and go. So it's possible, and it will happen. It's just a matter of time and making that investment.
Alyssia, what's your view?
Yeah, I fully agree with Anthony, because at the end of the day, there are some barriers currently to the widespread adoption of plug and charge, and it is probably the closest journey that is as simple as buying a cup of coffee. But because of how fast the industry is growing and the level of complexity associated with that growth as well, there is still quite a bit of a way that we need to go. And I believe that collaboration, innovation, investment, and keeping the customer at the center of it is the way to go. Because at the end of the day, we need to be able to ensure that we are able to serve the customers today and tomorrow.
Thank you. Just before we go for any questions in the audience, Richard, just your view. So, of course, TfL has got a single payment system within London, and it works really well. and that kind of model feels like it's somewhere we're going to need to move to. And you've touched on it a couple of times with the use of open data, which is what feeds the TfL and loads of apps that we use just to get around cities. Over what kind of time period, or how, actually, more importantly, how do you think, what's the big thing we might need to do to get to a place where it's as easy as buying our coffee?
Yeah, I think so. The TfL project, so it's coming up to 10 years since you were able to use your contactless card on the tube, and also the tube network has expanded massively over that time horizon as well. But everything that went into that project was a real mixed bag of different entities that supported TfL to initiate that. So you needed all of the payment companies, you needed all of the banks to support it, you needed back office tech companies in order to actually build the platform, the data elements that sit around that as well. So I think being able to bring together, and you mentioned collaboration as well, but being able to bring together all of these companies that can drive towards a common goal, that's what we're going to need, because ultimately what you have is just the gap between demand and supply in EV at the moment, and that's what we need to address in order to move forwards.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the three of you, who do you think needs to make the first step to do this? Who can really make that happen? Who'd like to go first? Perhaps a regulator, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as BP Pulse, we are aiming to be UK's best electric vehicle charging network. And at the moment, our actions have indicated that, yes, there are areas of development required, but we are actively investing in our network. We are working towards identifying those areas of improvement and implementing measures to close those gaps. And on top of that, we are innovating to be able to give our customers a differentiated experience and help them make more sustainable decisions and make that switch over to electric vehicles. So I think it is a combined effort because at the end of the day, like Richard said, it requires all parties to come to the table and be able to achieve that level of innovation and standardization.
And if it's not controversial to say, I mean, I'd love to see the OEMs open up their platforms more so that people can innovate within the vehicles.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Anything from you, Anthony, on that?
No, I was going to echo what Richard said about the OEMs opening up. Yep. I think most charging point operators now have adopted the OCPP protocol. I think that is essential. But it's all about, just allowing the best app, best software companies to be able to communicate with all the different parts and pieces of hardware, including the OEMs. That will enable the best possible customer experience. Closed networks just hamper growth.
Clear direction for us. Okay, so we're going to. It's difficult for me to see, but I'll ask if there are any questions from the audience.
Hello, thank you. Interesting discussion. You've kind of skirted around it a bit. Monetization. Isn't at the core of this a land grab for who's going to make most money out of it? Whether it's energy companies, charge point operators, OEMs, or another. Ultimately, it's about finding the way in which someone is going to make a lot of money, and in doing so, they're going to have to push other people out of the way and get to that point where they've got the ubiquitous protocol that works well for everybody. So isn't this essentially about just working out what is the, what's the business model that's going to succeed and dominate? More than systems and principles. And by the way, getting a cup of coffee isn't as easy these days. You get 26 choices and you have to queue up for about 20 minutes to get one.
As long as you know what you want.
I think it's going to remain incredibly fragmented for the foreseeable future. I think if you think about the lift that's required in order to stand up, charge point solutions and the investment that's required, it's going to remain fragmented. I think that perhaps the key would be in 10 years' time when it starts to come together and you see a lot more mergers, acquisitions within this space. What is it going to look like after that? But it feels to me at the moment that there's margin in this for most of the different players across the ecosystem.
Okay.
There'll definitely be consolidation. And when that happens, there'll be 2 or 3 big players, and there should be enough pie to share between them. But yeah, I think as Richard said, I think we're still quite a long way away from that.
Thank you. Just to the point that we've touched on a few times around people charging at home, that's the majority today. Most people buying an EV today can do that. In the future, that's not going to be so much the case. And there's less range anxiety these days than recharging anxiety, the usual stuff we've talked about, I'm sure all of us in this room. How are we going to make sure that we can transition things like service stations to being recharging stations? Maybe Alyssia, you can pick up on that one. But I can imagine a scenario not in 2030, because there are still, as Marc said, with 9 million electric vehicles on the road, there are still 20-something million ICE on the road. But in 2040, that's going to swing the other way around. So surely there's going to need to be quite an accelerated transition. Does that need to be supply-led rather than waiting for the demand to be there? Can it be spurred by making more service stations switch to electric earlier?
Yeah, so great question. We ensure that our network is based on locations and the stats around consumer behavior within those locations. So we specifically design the network locations to be based on where most of the customers are. And in most of the European countries and our expansion globally, we've focused on high-speed chargers, in most cases hubs at existing retail forecourts, to create that hybrid experience for customers who have either transitioned from ICE to EV or have a combination of ICE and EV in their household. So currently that model exists, and in the UK, there is an initiative underway to expand that model and to implement sites that have more cross-offer acceptance across EV, fuel, convenience, car wash, cafes as well, so that the customer who has multiple vehicles and multiple journeys that they want to complete has that level of flexibility. So the transition is underway, and we have to strike that balance between unattended EV chargers and chargers that are in a hub format at existing retail forecourts, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to get our network from a point. Currently, 70% of UK customers are within 5 miles of an EV charger, of a BP EV charger, and within the next 10 years with our investment, we want to aim to have that at 100%. And part of that is the hub model of retail/EV, yeah.
Thank you very much for your questions, gents. We're going to close off this panel now. Looking forward to a world where we can have a Pret and a Costa and a Nero. That's a future that we can all happily look forward to in the charging space. I would like to thank our panelists for taking part in the first session of the 2022 EV Summit and for sharing your insights this morning. Thank you for joining us by Zoom, Anthony. We're now going to have our first networking break before we hand over to Minister Jessie Norman for a special address. So we will see you back here at 11.